I'm certainly very happy to be here, and I thought I was gonna have it much easier because I didn't understand I had to do anything except to enjoy all of the things going on here, come see some new country, meet some new people. And all of a sudden, I'm cast into this situation where I've gotta go make a speech. I know how boring that is, because the last thing you ever wanted to do was to sit through a speech by some corporate muggle. But this is actually very relaxing for me. I'm very happy to be here because we were sitting around talking about politics. And politics is, if anything, not relaxing, but getting up here. Good. But before I get there, I need to tell you what I'm supposed to do. People have certain expectations, and I'll tell you what you should expect from me, which obviously is not very much. But I was told that what I really needed to do was I really needed to tell you the entire history of my company, Data General. And I also need to do this very briefly, because you weren't going to stand here and listen to me talk for very long. Most people, when they graduate from high school, I know it's called other things in other countries, but it's basically the end of your primary education before considering the university. Many students know exactly what they want to do, and many others have to figure that out as they go along. I was in the former group. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an engineer. But there were a few problems in getting there. Number one, I had to get through the university, and the university cost money and took time. And so I had to find a way through all of these variables. And what I found was that I could use some of my early stage engineering skills to make some money. And so I took a job with a local appliance company fixing televisions. And at that time, televisions broke frequently. So I became one of the experts in the movie The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz was a movie, it was actually a book, and then a movie that was very popular among, I'd say, teenage children at that time. Very popular in the mid-50s. And one other thing, or many other things, that was happening in the mid-50s was television was being sent in color. And people who had looked at this black and white thing were all of a sudden saying, wow, isn't this beautiful? And sometimes it was, and sometimes it required my attention to make it beautiful. So this particular movie was shown on television on Sunday nights. And the reality was that none of my competitors wanted to work on Sunday. So I became the only color television technician in town, which was an interesting education because having no competitors gave you a lot of opportunity to make some money. And it also taught me that being involved in a new innovative industry was a good place to be. These were all lessons that I didn't know I learned when I learned them, but those are sometimes the best kind. So I headed off to the university, and since universities cost money, I needed to be able to pay my tuition. But having the ability to spend Sunday nights watching The Wizard of Oz in customers' homes for profit gave me the money that I needed to pay my tuition and all of those things associated with the university. And I pursued a degree in electrical engineering. I learned something else very quickly. And the U.S. Air Force came around to recruit students to join what they called ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, which was basically to get people with technical educations to join the Air Force. And so I looked at all of this and I said, wow, would I love to fly one of those fighter planes. And of course they took us to airports and showed us these airplanes that made a lot of noise, airplanes. And at that time, airplanes that made a lot of noise were a good thing, and I know that's changed. And so they offered me various desk jobs, which interested me not. That was not what I wanted to do. But, so I gave up on that one. The other idea that it came to me in talking to various people was I wanted to have my own business. I wanted to run a company. So I decided that I needed to have a business education if that's what I ever wanted to do. And while I was a good engineer, I graduated with high marks, I really didn't know anything about running a business. So off I went to find a job. And needless to say, I needed the help of somebody like Michael in our area, and he wasn't there. So I did find somebody who could show me some job opportunities, and I ended up taking a job at a very small growing company. As a matter of fact, I was about the 100th employee who ever joined Digital Equipment. And many of you have probably heard of Digital Equipment. It's certainly a very fine company. So I loved working at Digital Equipment. I could be an engineer. It was a very high-paced job where there were a lot of very bright people doing things. And I was assigned to work on a contract they had for the Atomic Energy Commission of Canada. And this was to monitor a power reactor. So I went to Canada, I met with these people, and I proposed a design. I actually worked for the custom products division, such as it was.
That's nice.
And so I proposed a design which would be specially done for them to solve their problem. And they liked it. They said, this is great. And they gave us a contract to proceed. I then began to talk to a number of my colleagues at Digital Equipment, all of whom were much older and wiser than I was. And one of the people I talked to was somebody who has been basically a legend in the industry, Gordon Bell. And he's probably not a name that everybody knows, but in the computer industry, he was extraordinary. And Gordon looked all this over and said, this is the wrong way to do this thing. And I was very disappointed. And he said, wait a minute. He said, let's look at a different approach. Rather than this special product that you propose to them, why don't we build a very small computer and use that as the heart of our proposal? So I learned another lesson there, and that is that there are a lot of people with good ideas, and that nobody has a monopoly, and however smart I think I am, I need to check with a lot of other people and kind of get some input. So this gave me another problem. After I had extolled the virtues of my approach, I now had to go back to Canada and tell them I changed my mind, that there was a better way, and I would like them to sign up for the better way. So I thought this was a big problem, but fortunately the people at the Atomic Energy Commission in Canada were very smart, and they saw the proposal which I presented to them, which basically incorporated the ideas I had from Gordon, and they said, yes, do it. And so we were off and running to build a very small computer. And this would direct me toward what my career would be for the next several years at Digital. And that was in presenting technical ideas and solutions to customers. So this allowed me to practice and learn a lot more, not only about technology, but also about customer relations and sales. So off we went, we did this project, we brought the very small computer to the marketplace, we demonstrated it at the computer shows, and it was a runaway hit. This computer was made up of 12-bit words, those of you who know the technology. But then we had another problem, and that was we had a small competitor in Armonk, New York, named IBM. And IBM did not make small computers. IBM made very large computers to be sold to business. The small computer was much better adapted to industrial and scientific applications because it could be interconnected with other things that particular customers might want, and then it could be programmed to do different tasks. So, IBM at that time offered a line of computers called the 360 line. Well, they had just actually announced the 360 line. And the previous computers utilized words, and that's a digital kind of thing, that were multiples of 6 bits. And the peripheral equipment, things that it dealt with, like printers and storage devices, were all built to work on 6-bit words. And with the introduction of the 360, IBM changed to an 8-bit word, an 8-bit segment of the word, which became known as a byte.
That's possible.
And they then built computers with 16, 32, and multiples of 8. And all of the competitors in the world were doing what I had done initially, which was to design a machine which was a multiple of 6, from a la my first PDP, which was a 12-bit. And I had kind of moved where I was at digital. I originally worked with the Special Projects Group as an engineer. I built this 12-bit computer, which was called the PDP-5 and was an extremely successful product. And at that point, I went to work for the sales department. And I spent the next segment of my career working with customers, helping the customers to understand the product, how to use it, to do whatever they needed to be done, and frankly, to buy them from digital equipment. So I went to Ken Olson, who was an engineer and the president of digital equipment at that time, and pointed out to him that the industry's basic unit of measure was changing. It used to be 6 bits, it's now 8 bits because IBM could absolutely force that, and we ought to do the same. So I presented this idea to Ken that we ought to move quickly into the 8, 16, 24-bit world, and he gave it considerable thought. He presented it to various committees within the company and to various people he had confidence in, and he came back and said, you know, the engineers and the salesmen like this idea, but the manufacturing people hate it because it will cost them to retool all of what they do. And on top of that, the field service engineers don't like it because they'll have to retrain their whole force. And there were a couple of other details going on in the industry at that time, which I won't go into, but kind of reinforced the fact that even though it looked like a great product, it would have such bad implications within the corporation in terms of things that had to be changed, that he decided that we shouldn't do it. So I couldn't make that sale. But I decided at that time that I had enough confidence in that idea and that market direction that I had to do it myself. So there were several other people within digital who I knew well, who had come to me and said, you know, this is really a good idea. And particularly I paid attention to the people on the sales and marketing side who said, this is what customers want to buy. And I managed to put together a group of 4 of us who said, let's go do this thing. One of the lacks we had within that group was we really didn't have somebody who was a salesman. Okay, we'll get to the money, we need that too. But so one of the group, a man named Dick Sogi, had been dealing with a semiconductor salesman. He worked for Fairchild Semiconductor, and he too was interested in an opportunity. And so we ultimately recruited him. This was Herb Richmond was his name. Herb Richmond was really unique. I mean, he was somebody who not only understood how the job ought to be done, but he knew how to do it. And his theory was that salespeople needed to be paid on commission. Digital paid all of their salespeople a salary because Ken felt that salesmen somehow would prostitute themselves to get the order, and if they were on commission, they do all kinds of weird things. Herb also was a great recruiter, and this is no put down to my colleague here because he made a career of it, but Herb, in addition to being a great marketeer, could hire the very best people. In addition to all that, Herb had a lot of contacts in the financial world. And while myself and many of my technical colleagues did not know that world, Herb did. And he was able to put us in touch with the right people to basically solicit investments, because this business, like any business, needed some startup capital. So we were, through Herb's contacts, and I will say also through the sensibleness of the project we proposed, we were able to raise the money rather quickly and get back to work. And it took us from April to December to build this product and to then display it at one of the computer trade fairs. But we were now to another crossroads. We had a product, we had a great salesman, but we didn't really know how to present this to the outside world. And so we then talked to a man that I knew and also Herb knew, who was basically a marketeer. And marketeers, in my mind, don't sit in the office thinking up sales plans, they get out and do stuff. And Alan Clutchman, who was our original marketeer, decided that we ought to put together some ads and go put them in various. So he started working with some ad agencies, and we put together some fairly interesting ads, some of which I'll mention to you. I don't want to go through them all, but one of them, there were a couple of very interesting ones. One I think you'll relate to. At that time, batch processing was basically the way it worked. We had some computing to be done, some bills to be written or paid. You would put that on punch cards and you'd go in a batch and put them into a computer, and it would do whatever it needed to do and give you back the results. And the market we were entering was an interactive market where the user would interact directly with the computer. And so we decided to feature the fact that we did not support batch processing, but we supported interactive processing. So the first of the ads that Alan did was one which has a very large headline, says "Batch is a bitch." So this went over pretty well. People were reading the ad and they kind of got the picture until we got a letter from Mrs. Evelyn Batch. Fortunately, Fortunately, Evelyn liked the idea. And she came out to our offices and we met with her and she thought it was great. So what we thought might be a big problem turned out, among other things, to be an advantage. Another one of Alan's ads which was well received was a few years later, not the too many, IBM decided that there was a real business here and that they needed to get involved in it. And so they brought to market a thing called the IBM System 1, which was basically in the same market space that we were. Obviously, there were a lot of differences. But the pundits has been saying, you know, there aren't any really big companies in this segment of the marketplace. And so it's a little hard for people to, particularly in large organizations doing data processing, to recommend this to their management. And so in any event, it was believed that IBM's entry would rectify this problem, if for nobody else for IBM.
Yeah.
So Alan took this to his ad agencies and went over it, and they said, we have an idea. And the next ad said, they say that IBM's entry into the mini computer business will revolutionize the industry, will legitimize the industry, I'm sorry. The bastards say welcome. Anyway, we moved on in this marketplace, and I don't want to go into all of the technical details. I don't think they're all that interesting, but you know, we made bigger, faster, better machines, introduced new product lines, and you know, put out a lot of software, which was necessary, which unfortunately or fortunately engendered a huge legal battle and shakeup in the industry, because we had written software that was useful on our computers and had given that to anybody who bought one of our computers at no additional charge. Well, I guess what I should have understood, the obvious, happened, and that was competitors emerged who manufactured the hardware and wanted to use the software we'd written for free. And we said, that's not what we had in mind at all. What we had in mind was we wrote this software to enhance the sales of our product, and if somebody else wanted to write software to enhance the sales of theirs, they were at liberty, but they couldn't take ours and use it as a tool to sell theirs. So we ended up with a bunch of legal cases like this, which was a big distraction. So I ended up learning about a lot of stuff I just as well would have preferred not to. So we kept moving in this direction, enhancing our product and building our market presence, because the reality was that initially we only had the resources to focus in the US, but the reality is that much of the marketplace is outside of North America, if you will, because we did some stuff in Canada. And so Herb then got busy looking for distribution channels in the rest of the industrialized world. And needless to say, the first stop he made was in Europe. And since he spoke English, the first stop he paid in Europe was in the UK. But we all recognized that while the UK was an interesting market, that there was a whole lot more there. And so Herb went and recruited a whole series of distributors, so a bunch of really one per country. One of the things we found out was that the relationships one needs to build in the technical market like this are such that it's very difficult to go cross-country. For us to hire a Frenchman to come do this in Germany wouldn't have worked. And so Herb was able to put in place, and I don't remember who the name of our first distributor in Germany was. He put in place a whole series of distributors in virtually all of the countries. And it was really strange, because we assume that our sales in any other, in any country would be kind of a function of its size. Not so. It was a function of the competence of the distributor. And we had disproportionate market share in Denmark. Why? Because the distributor we had in Denmark was really good. And that brought me to understand something which I sort of understood, but really understood in spades. And that was that to make this thing work, you had to have the very best people. This process of using distributors turned out to be limited in terms of size. That as we went along, the requirements increased significantly. The first distributors were sales organizations. Their job was to sell the product. But sooner or later, it became clear that after the product was sold, and we knew this from our US experience, then although I never would have believed it to start with, some of these computers broke from time to time.
Is that right?
And so we needed an organization in those countries, which included field engineers, we needed to have inventory, and we needed to have people who could work with the customers directly to identify what the problem was. And that process went on over time, and it basically started with, from the distributors saying, you know, I really can't do this job anymore. It's gotten too big, too complicated for me, and we need you to step in. So we begun to turn a number of these distribution agreements into company subsidiaries, as obviously. But as we moved to this and brought on subsidiaries in various countries, we basically maintained the concept, which was that we would only hire the best people. If we couldn't find somebody that was really up to our standards, we wait. And we ended up, of course, with some political discussions. I met with one of the, I'm not quite sure I described his position in Paris to get them to let us set up a subsidiary there. I spent untold time in Japan working with MITI, which is the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, which Herb had renamed the Ministry of Favorable Trade, because that's what they did. But as this unfolded and we got more and more successful, a fundamental problem began to creep in that every other company of this sort has. And that's a problem which is based on the fact that a company with multiple products that succeed each other with better and better capabilities often has to deal with some very uncomfortable circumstances. This problem was one which was not well known 50 years ago, but the major business schools studied it very heavily in the last 20 or 30 years. And they've constructed a theory, what they call the theory of the S-curve. And the S-curve, of course, is a curve that's based on the letter S. And at the bottom of this curve is the beginning of the introduction of a new product. And during that time, it's very flat because it takes some time for clients to understand the product and to design it in, to put in place the staff they need to support it. And then when all of this stuff happens, assuming it's a good product, which all of ours were, and it then begins to turn up very rapidly. And it becomes an extraordinary success until it reaches a point where maybe a competitor has superseded it a little bit, or maybe the market is saturated, but in any event, it flattens out going forward and growth stops in effect. And growth, of course, is important to any business. And this has been traced through products of many companies, including companies as large as GE. And the problem seems to be fundamental, and it's basically when things are going well, you want to reap the profits and you don't want to invest them in something else. And the reality is you should be down here with the next product, putting a lot of money into that R&D and being ready for the time when it will grow fast and also the time when it will level out. But the, I guess, short-term view of many corporations and certainly the financer makes that very, very hard to do. So we were a victim of that problem as well, not alone. Virtually nobody's ever solved it. But there's all degrees of solution. I felt that at that time, what we needed to do was we needed to just put all of our resources into the next product and to, you know, kind of keep the old ones going, but that wasn't where the real investment went. My board disagreed. And I told my board they had two choices. They could either implement a program whereby we put a lot of money into research and development for the next generation product, or they would die. And as Eileen says, I'm very tactful about such things. So I did what would be expected, and I went ahead and did it anyway. And the board did exactly what they would normally do under circumstances, and they fired me. And you can judge for yourself what the results were. In any event, I'm taking way too much time, and I hope I've given you some idea of the earlier history of Data General, because I know you guys know it extraordinarily well during the go-go years. But I've learned another thing which I share with my wife, and that is that when you're selling, when you've got the order, you leave. Thank you